Hi everyone, Stepan here. In today's video I'm going to continue the series on the Catalan opening, and we are still in the Open Catalan. We only have two more moves to cover. Today we are going to go over knight c6, which is black's second most popular choice against the Open Catalan, or in the Open Catalan. And it makes perfect sense. I basically play this position with both sides now, because my main opening with black is knight f6, e6 against d4, and I've been facing the Catalan a lot. And knight c6 is something I'm considering seriously to take it as my main weapon against the Catalan, because it leads to positions which are easy to play for black. And if you've been following the series so far, you know that the Open Catalan is often not easy to play for black. If you haven't seen the introductory video, there's a link in the description below, so watch it so that you have a better idea of what I'm talking about. But basically we are discussing this position here, which occurs after d4, knight f6, c4, e6. This is the main move order. There are other move orders, again watch the introductory video, and knight f3, d5, and white basically gives up this pawn. If black doesn't take the pawn but plays bishop to e7, that's the close Catalan. We are continuing with that after we finish the last video in the Open, and if he takes, that's the Open Catalan. And now after bishop to g2, black has a lot of moves. a6 is the main move, knight c6, which we are covering today, is the second most popular, and we have covered all the other sidelines already. So we are looking at the move knight to c6. Now, in the Open Catalan, there are often issues on this diagonal with the rook, and often white manages to regain the pawn, and then achieves a position in which he's traded off his c2 pawn for black's d7 pawn, and they cannot highlight this enough. That's a big positional edge to have a central pawn on d4, where when black doesn't have the d pawn, it's basically the advantage black gets in the Sicilian. But black could try to hold on to the pawn, which could make white's life complicated if he manages to get this pawn majority going. Now, the move knight c6 may seem strange, because often in the Open Catalan black wants to attack this d4 pawn with the move c5, and obviously when you play knight c6 it's not easy to play c5. But let me explain what this move is about. The idea behind knight c6, as opposed to what we can see in the main line, which is coming tomorrow, but let me just show you one thing. If black plays a6, this move obviously prepares b5 to defend the pawn. Then white's main move is castles, and one of black's choices is knight c6 here. The difference is that black has interposed this move a6 first, and after e3, bishop to d7, defending the knight to make sure there are no discovered tricks, queen e2 and b5. You can now see that this rook is still on the diagonal. This knight cannot be harassed that easily because bishop d7 has been played, and black has wasted the move on a6. With knight c6, and again more on that position tomorrow, with knight c6 black's idea is simply to play rook b8 and b5, which sorts out some of his issues, gets the rook away from this diagonal, making all tactical tricks far less powerful, and you could argue that it's much more useful to develop a piece than to play a6 if you want to achieve the same goal. So the main idea is rook b8 and b5. So what can white do about that? Well, white basically has two options here. One of them I will just mention briefly and discard. This option goes into black's hands, and that's castling. So this is still a theoretical move. It's not bad, but in most lines, black is supposed to have an advantage. And this is basically why I like knight c6, because I think most Catalan players will find it very natural to castle here. The problem is that after rook b8 and something like knight c3, which is a very natural move, black can now continue with b5. And if you try knight e5, which is the Catalan way of, well, challenging black, then black is simply better after knight takes e5. Of course, there's no rook on a8. And after d takes e5, you don't exchange queens, you play knight to d7, putting some pressure on the e5 pawn, and queen d4 to defend the pawn, and now c5. And this position is extremely pleasant for black. The engine gives it as minus 0.6. Now, there are alternatives, but there's basically no need to get into this. After knight c6, there's a much simpler move, which you can play with white, which gives white, in all variations, a slight annoying edge. And you have to know about 25 moves of theory in the main lines, and unfortunately for Catalan players, you have to know a lot of theory, but you are preparing an entire repertoire with white, so it's worth investing that time, and basically learning this next move will give you a great weapon against knight c6. So the move is queen to a4, and this is the main move. Now black has a couple of options. The main move is bishop b4 check, and this is by far most challenging. I will just briefly mention the sidelines, which you have to know before we get onto the mainline theory. The sidelines are bishop d7, knight d7, bishop d6, and knight d5. Knight d5 is, after queen a4, knight d5 is the rarest of all moves. White is basically forced to take on c4 straight away, otherwise knight b6 is coming and black is defending everything. So queen takes c4, and after knight b6, black gets a ton of active play. So queen d3, which is the main retreat for the queen, and now black's idea, which is another point behind knight c6, is that he can easily play the move e5. And this move, supported by the knight, equalizes the position. So knight takes e5. Now, of course, you don't trade, you play knight to b4, which is a tricky move, and white has to play queen c3. Now queen takes on d4. Excuse me, if you take the queen, then knight c2, of course. Instead, white just castles, and queen takes c3. Knight takes c3. This position should be about equal. I think white should hold a slight edge because of one issue in the black position. That's the fact that he cannot develop the bishop easily. So black is going to have to waste time on c6. And you could argue that these knights don't really do that much on the queen side. And also, black's king is still on e8. If any endgame should occur, then black has a 3-2 on the queen side, white has a 4-3 on the king side. It should be about equal. But for the moment, as I said, white has a lead in development, a better light squared bishop, a safer king, and no issues. Black has this issue with b7. So that's knight d5. Not really one of the main lines, but you should still know what to do about that. Just remember to take on c4 straight away. Okay, and then let's have a look at knight d7, which is kind of a strange move. Against knight d7, the idea is the same. You play queen b6, and then knight d7 leads to the same position we just saw. So knight d5 and knight d7 are basically equal. There's nothing better than to play queen c4 and then for black to play knight b6. And we have two more moves remaining. In the sidelines, bishop to d6 is an interesting choice, and black is simply planning to play e5. Supported by the knight, supported by the bishop. But there's a way to play against this. First, you castle, black castles to unpin to make sure this knight can support e5 and d4. Now you take on c4, black plays e5, and you can just ignore this. You just play knight c3, and after e d4, knight d4, knight d4, queen d4, something like queen e7. Again, black has the same problem. This bishop will have a hard time developing. Again, black is going to have to play c6 at some point, which is a move that positionally looks fine. You are preventing knight d5 and knight b5, but it's not a move you would really like to play. It's not a move, it's not an active move. It doesn't contribute to black's position. It's just a prophylactic necessity which has to be done. So that's bishop d6, and nothing to worry about for white. You again have the same advantage of the light squared bishop. And finally, bishop to d7, which unpins. Threatens the d4 pawn if the knight should move, also supports e5 because the knight is not pinned. Again, you just take on c4. And now there's an idea behind bishop to d7, and that's to play knight a5. Here, queen c3 isn't good because of knight d5, so you retreat to d3 again, and now the idea is c5. So because this knight was blocking your c pawn, you want to move the knight away, and this is fairly similar to what we saw already in c5 lines, and white should, of course, castle. Here, there's a choice between bishop c6 and rook c8. Both moves, I wouldn't say, are challenging for white. Against both moves, you just play knight c3 and cd4. Knight d4 is going to happen. So after knight c6, knight c3, cd4, knight d4. The difference is that bishop c6 offers a trade. And after this trade, black, of course, does not have an issue on b7 anymore. So after something like bishop c5, rook d1 defending the knight, black castles, you can play bishop g5. White has slightly better activity. the knight on a5 is misplaced, but in exchange for that, black managed to trade off the light squared bishops. Obviously, white's light squared bishop was better. So again, should be about equal, but nothing for white to worry about. Still a slight annoying edge. Now let's go to the main move. By far the most popular move. Let me just switch to this. Queen a4 is bishop to b4 check. Now, why is this move good? Well, firstly, it gains a tempo and it makes it easier for black to castle, makes it easier for black to sort out his activity issues, the activity issues black often has in the Catalan, in the Open Catalan, excuse me. As we know, whenever one side grabs material, the other side should play for the initiative if they want to not get the material back straight away. So bishop b4 is sensible in that respect. You play bishop to d2. Now I should first I should mention that bishop takes d2 is not a good move. White has a completely winning position after this because knight takes b2 threatens to take on c4 with the knight. Whenever you can take on c4 with the knight, that means that e5 cannot be played. If e5 cannot be played, then the bishop is going to stay on c8. Because if b6 or b5, then knight e5 wins material. So let me just show you that. If, for example, castles and queen takes c4, if you try, well, now if you try b6, then you just lose here. So you cannot play e5, and this is an amazing position. You can continue e4, e5, and just blast open black's game and still keep this pressure along the diagonal. So basically, if black takes on d2, then he will never develop his queen side easily. So after bishop to d2, there are a couple of sensible options. You can play bishop d6, retreating the bishop. That's a sideline that isn't really popular, but it has been played by Anand. I've analyzed one Anand game recently with the move bishop d6, so it's not bad. But knight d5 is definitely better, just supporting the bishop. Let's go over bishop d6 first. Now here, I would like to suggest a move that out of the three options, you have three options. You can take on c4, you can castle, or you can play the move I'm about to show you. Again, since we are covering this opening for white, I'm going to be recommending stuff for white and covering everything black can do against that. So here I would recommend the move knight a3. And again, we have the same idea. If you can take on c4 with the knight, then e5 is not going to happen, despite the bishop having been developed to d6. So if you take on a3, that's probably... well, that's probably the main move. I would say knight e4 is also okay. Knight e4 is the second most popular. Against knight e4, you can take on c4 with the knight, defending your bishop. Black grabs the bishop. Whoa, excuse me. You can take with both knights, but knight f takes is better. Pressure on c6. Now bishop d7, defending c6. e3, castles, and something like b3, getting away from the spin and targeting b7. So b5. You don't want to take on b5 because knight d4. Instead, you just take knight takes d6, c takes d6, and white is great. This is just a perfect position. You haven't castled yet, but just nice. So against knight a3, what black should do is prevent knight takes c4 and simply play bishop takes a3. And after queen takes a3, there are two moves. One of them is horrendous, and that's grabbing a second pawn. And one of them is theory. Let's just see why knight takes d4 is bad. Because of knight takes d4, queen takes d4, and rook to d1. And in this position, black basically doesn't have a good move. The best retreat, of course, is queen to b6, but that runs into bishop a5. And now it's getting tough to play this position. For example, if queen b5, then bishop c7. You don't have the option to play queen d6 or queen c5, so you can play here or here or here. So bishop takes c7. So that's just bad. Instead of that, after queen takes a3, black should continue with knight e4 and don't bother with the second pawn. But a simple solution to this knight intrusion is bishop to e3, defending the pawn. Black should play queen d6, offering a queen trade, and now rook c1, simply targeting c4. You still want to grab your pawn back, and black has nothing better but to double the pawns. So takes, a takes, knight d6, defending c4, knight e5, attacking c4. If you exchange the knights, then c4 is dropping because the d6 knight is going to have to move away. So bishop d7, knight takes c4, knight f5, and now we have a position in which white has the bishop pair, doubled a pawns, but a permanent advantage. After bishop f4, targeting c7, and rook c8, e3. The only thing you have to sort out is the threat of g5, f6 and g5, winning your bishop at some point, so you just play g4, and after knight h4 you can play bishop e4. You have a permanent edge with your bishop pair and with the pressure along the c file. So I think this is a very simple way to refute the move bishop d6. White should hold a slight advantage whatever black does. If you know the plans here, this is going to be great. Remember that you don't have to castle. You can play king e2, which is a much more active move. Your main targets are c7 and the black king, if black is not careful. And because you have the bishop pair, you will sometimes have ideas of knight d6 check and stuff like so. If the knight moves, for example, there are already ideas of knight d6 check. So a very pleasant position. And the main move is not bishop d6 for the reasons we just discussed. It's knight d5. And here there are two options. Again, the main option I'm about to show you is what you should be playing. There's a very dubious pawn sacrifice which temporarily gives white full compensation for the pawn, for the 2 pawns actually, but it's just no good, and that's queen b5. And after queen b5, bishop d2, knight b takes d2 developing, and now c3. And after c3, bc3, knight c3, queen d3 retreating, and knight d5. I mean, white is a pawn down. Black is perfectly safe after castling. I don't think you have enough. I mean, especially with this knight already being on d5, this is just not good. This is not good. You can play either rook to c1, but I don't think you have enough. So queen b5 is a very, very dubious pawn sacrifice, which I don't think should be played. So instead of that, after knight d5, we are going to be following the main lines. Now we are on move 8. White is about to play move 8. You have to know the next 15 to 20 moves. And the good news is that the main line is forced and there will be very few deviations, only about 2 or 3. What you have to do by yourself is learn the bad moves. The good thing, again, in the Catalan is that bad moves can often be punished with similar plans. So it's not going to be hard to refute them over the board. So we are going to be playing bishop takes b4. Okay, knight takes b4. Of course, the d knight, the c knight is pinned, and now we simply castle. Okay, we still haven't regained this pawn, but after rook b8, preparing to defend the pawn with b5, we now continue knight a3, stopping b5. That's the key move. Now in this position, you could also play knight c3, but I would recommend knight a3. That's better. So in this position, black has 2 ways to play this position. One of them is to unpin and allow the c4 pawn to be captured. The other one is a6, and let's just briefly go over that. I don't believe that's as good as castling. So against a6, you can simply play knight to e5, and this prevents any b5 ideas. If b5 is played, then of course you take on c6, and if knight takes c6, then bishop c6 check. If pawn takes queen, then knight takes queen, and white is of course winning this position. So b5 cannot be played. So after a6 and knight e5, black is basically forced to take on d4. So after queen takes d4, knight takes c6, knight takes c6, bishop takes c6, b takes c6, queen takes c6. You can play queen d7 or bishop d7. And this is just good for white. This is a very nice position. The material is equal, but black obviously hasn't castled yet. White has rook d1 coming up. The c4 pawn is about to drop, and it's just a horrendous position. If rook c8, queen b7, a6 is attacked, so that's no good. And the other option is castles, if you don't play queen takes d4, but that runs into knight c6, bishop c6, bc6, and now knight c4. Queen c6 also possible, but knight c4 is better defending the b2 pawn. And again, a perfect position. You have 2 targets. easy to play. So the move a6, I honestly wouldn't recommend for black. What black should be looking at, and what the main line is the move castles. And now this next move is hard to find over the board, I believe. Of course, if you play knight c4, then b5 forks your stuff, so you play queen b5. That prevents b5 again and attacks c4. The c4 pawn is going nowhere. And black has one way to play this position. If black doesn't know this, then he is almost losing straight away. And that's b6, bishop a6, gaining a tempo on the queen. Now what you do here is queen takes c4, bishop a6, and you block with knight b5. And we are starting serious theory now. Queen d5, challenging the queen. Queen takes queen. Knight takes queen, and a4. You would love white to take here, because then this pawn would be a permanent target. And of course there's still trouble along the diagonal, so knight a5 is the main move. And now knight e5. And you're of course threatening to take here, so rook b2 to d8, and knight takes a7. And don't worry, black hasn't given up any material, he's going to get it back. This is a forced line, so black continues with knight to b4, attacking your d4 pawn. You play rook a to c1, black takes on d4, you take on c7, and black takes on e2. And after rook f to c1, this position is slightly better for white. 2-to-1 pawn majority on the queen side, which is very promising. To be honest, all four knights look incredibly stupid, and this position doesn't look natural, but there are about 50 games from this position. They're all following the same line. f6, knight e6, forcing a trade of all the knights. Knight takes, knight takes, knight takes, rook takes. Two pawns attacked, so rook f to d8, and now you have to sort out your back rank issues, so h3, and now rook to d6 sorts out the problem of both pawns. You can take, and for example bishop f1, and now we reach an end game, which if you play the Catalan or if you play knight c6 in the Open Catalan, you have to know. And this is basically where you start learning if you are a top player. So you have to find tricks in this endgame. I could compare this to a line in the Caro-Kann, in the Panov, where in the Panov, in which, let me just show you that. So knight c6 and knight f3 and bishop g4 and takes and queen b3, and this happens. Okay, so this is the starting position of an endgame. I've only played it once and I managed to beat a 2150 player in the Croatian Cup, and I've been studying this endgame for about 10 hours altogether for the black side, and I managed to win with a nice idea, playing bishop c5, undoubling white's pawns but removing the pressure off my king. But basically, if we look at this position, it's very similar. The position is very simple, but there are a ton of ideas. So from here on, you have to be studying the plans and trying to find a way to push your pawn majority and to prevent the e5 pawn from moving forward. And black has several retreats, bishop f3, or simply trading off the bishops, or playing rook to d2. So it's a very rich position. But basically that's what you have to know. Now let's go through that again. So d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5, g3, dc, bishop g2, knight c6. We play queen a4. Black plays bishop b4 check. We block with the bishop. Knight d5 is the main move. And now bishop takes, not queen b5. Knight takes, castles, rook b8, and we play knight a3. And after castles, this move queen b5, forcing b6, bishop a6. We have a trade of queens. We play a4. And after knight a5, we play knight e5, threatening the exchange, and we win a pawn, which black gets back after knight b4, targeting d4, and this forced line continues. So just practice the forced line and focus on the endgame, and you should be fine. I think once you learn how to play against knight c6 once, it's going to be easy to play against it, because the bad moves will be easy to refute. Okay, tomorrow we are going to continue with the main line. Instead of knight a6, we will be looking at the move a6, which is by far the most theoretical and well, best for black. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think and stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.